The storm came from nowhere. Lightning tore the sky apart as Commander Ethan Voss gripped the controls. The alarms screamed louder than his own heartbeat. Navigation was blind, just static. He tried to pull up, but the engines were gone. The ship spun like a leaf in a hurricane. "Mayday. This is Scout Vessel A-29 losing altitude," he shouted into the comms. Silence. The world turned white, then black. When Ethan opened his eyes, everything was quiet. His head throbbed. Smoke filled the cracked cockpit. The air was thick and warm, heavy with a strange, sweet smell. He crawled out. The ship had carved a long trench in soft, pink soil. Giant trees stood around him, their leaves glowing like blue fireflies. His helmet scanner flickered. "Unknown atmosphere. Oxygen level safe. Life forms detected. Large. Multiple." Ethan froze. Large? The place was too quiet. Then a low vibration like thunder, but steady. Footsteps. Heavy ones. The ground trembled again. A shadow fell over him. Ethan looked up and his mouth went dry. A woman stood there. But she wasn't human. Not in size, anyway. She was huge. At least 40 feet tall. Her skin had a soft golden tone, her hair flowed like silver rivers, and her bright violet eyes locked onto him. She tilted her head, curious. Ethan stumbled back, hand on his blaster. "Stay back!" he shouted. The giantess knelt, her movement slow and graceful. Her breath washed over him, warm, sweet, and strangely intoxicating. She spoke, her voice deep and melodic. He couldn't understand the words, but the tone felt playful. Then she smiled. Ethan's heart raced. She reached for him, her fingers longer than his entire body. He fired his blaster. Blue light struck her palm, but it barely left a mark. She blinked, amused, not angry. Then she grabbed him gently, like someone holding a bird. He kicked and shouted, but her grip was soft yet unbreakable. She lifted him to her face, studying him like a strange insect. More footsteps, more shadows. 3 more giantesses emerged from the glowing forest. One with emerald hair, another with eyes like molten gold, and a third wearing armor made of crystal. They spoke to each other in a melodic alien language. Then all of them looked at Ethan. Their gazes felt heavy, hungry, but not in a way he understood. The first giantess held him close and said something that made the others laugh softly. He didn't like that sound. It was beautiful and dangerous. "I need to get out of here," he muttered. He tried to reach his emergency beacon, but her fingers covered it. Suddenly, a deafening roar echoed across the forest. The ground shook violently. The giantesses turned their heads. Something massive was coming. The one holding Ethan hissed, her expression turning angry. She placed him on her shoulder and started running, her huge strides shaking the ground. Ethan held onto her hair just to stay alive. They stopped near a cliff glowing with blue crystals. The giantess set him down and knelt. Her violet eyes softened. She said something slowly, touching her chest, then pointing at him. It sounded like a name. Lyria. He understood. She was telling him her name. He hesitated, then pointed to himself. "Ethan." She smiled again, repeating it. "Ethan." For a moment, he forgot the danger. The way she looked at him wasn't just curiosity. It was hunger, yes, but not for food. Then from the forest below, another roar, louder, closer. Ethan's heart pounded. Lyria stood tall, eyes fierce now. She said something to the other giantesses, and they moved quickly, forming a circle around him, as if to protect him. The air trembled with power. Their skin began to glow faintly, symbols appearing across their arms. Ethan stepped back, staring. What are you?" Lyria looked down at him, and for the first time he understood her without words. A warning. Something terrible was coming, and he wasn't sure if it was from the forest or from them. The ground shook again, and a massive shadow fell over all of them. The roar became a scream of rage. Ethan turned toward the sound, and what he saw made his blood freeze. What monster could make these giants afraid? What happens next? Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for part 2. Thanks for watching. The roar shook the very sky. Birds or whatever they were on this planet shot out from the glowing trees in a blinding storm of light. My legs felt like jelly. I could only stare toward the forest where trees the size of skyscrapers were bending and snapping like twigs. Something was coming. Something huge. The giantesses surrounded me, their eyes glowing with a strange, powerful energy. Lyria, the one who had saved me, raised her hand. A faint purple aura spread across her arm, and the others followed suit, forming a protective ring of shimmering light around me. Suddenly, the ground split open beneath my feet. From the darkness below, a massive creature rose, a beast covered in black scales, its eyes burning like red-hot coals. It had 6 legs, a jaw wide enough to crush my shuttle, and a long spiked tail that glowed with an unnerving green fire. "What the hell is that thing?" I whispered, my voice lost in the chaos. The creature roared again, and the shockwave sent dust and debris flying everywhere. Lyria stepped forward, shouting in her alien tongue, her voice echoing like thunder. The beast charged, and the ground shook so hard that I fell to my knees. Lyria struck first. She lifted her hand and threw a blast of light so bright I had to shield my eyes. When I looked again, the beast's chest was smoldering, but it didn't even slow down. It just kept coming. It whipped its tail, hitting Lyria with incredible force, and she fell back with a pained cry. The other giantesses screamed her name and attacked together, their light forming a barrier to keep me safe. I wanted to help, I really did. But what could a single human do among gods? Then my soldier's instinct kicked in. I pulled a flare grenade from my belt, switched it to overcharge, and sprinted toward the edge of the battle. "Hey! Over here, you overgrown lizard!" I yelled, and with all my might I threw it straight into the beast's open mouth. It exploded in a flash of light and intense heat. The beast roared in agony and stumbled back. For just a second, I saw Lyria look at me, and she smiled. Then her focus returned to the monster. She raised both hands. A surge of pure energy burst from her body, forming a beam that hit the creature square in the chest. It let out one final deafening scream, then fell. The entire forest trembled, and then silence. I dropped to the ground, gasping for air, my ears ringing. Smoke drifted between the broken, glowing trees. I looked up to see Lyria staring at me, her chest rising and falling, still aglow with that faint purple light. The other giantesses gathered around her, speaking quickly. One of them looked at me, her golden eyes narrowed with suspicion. It was clear she didn't trust me. But Lyria knelt beside me again. Her hand moved gently near my face, checking for wounds. "Ethan," she said softly. "I'm fine," I said, knowing she couldn't understand. "Thanks to you." She tilted her head, smiling again. Then she pointed toward the sky, where dark clouds were moving in fast, lightning flickering in the distance. She said something urgent to the others, and they nodded. I followed their gaze. My ship's wreckage was still miles away, but my emergency beacon might have survived. If I could get to it, maybe, just maybe, I could call for rescue. I pointed to the sky, then toward the forest. "Ship," I said. "Beacon." I mimed a crash and a signal. Lyria watched, confused at first, but then her expression changed to one of understanding. She nodded once, all business now, and spoke to the others. 2 of them disappeared into the forest, their footsteps shaking the ground. Lyria picked me up again as gently as before. This time I didn't resist. I was exhausted, and strangely calm. As she carried me through the glowing forest, I noticed strange marks carved into the huge trees. Symbols, circles, and spirals that glowed faintly as she passed. I realized they weren't just trees. They were ancient, sacred. After what felt like an hour, we reached a massive stone structure built into the side of a mountain. It looked like a temple. Lyria entered carefully, ducking beneath a grand archway. Inside, torches made of crystal burned with a cool blue flame. The other giantesses waited there, guarding the entrance. Lyria placed me on a wide stone platform in the center of the room. Around it, carvings glowed on the walls, images of stars, ships, and human-like figures kneeling before giants. I stared in disbelief. I ran my hand along one carving. It showed smaller beings, my size, standing beside giant women, together holding a sphere that looked like a planet. The writing beneath it was in symbols I didn't recognize, but one word repeated itself across the wall. Valora. I turned to Lyria. Valora? Is that this place? She nodded slowly. Valora, she repeated. Then suddenly the crystal flames flickered. The light dimmed. A cold wind blew through the temple. Lyria's smile vanished. She turned sharply toward the entrance, her eyes glowing brighter. From outside came the sound of a horn, deep, echoing, ancient. The other giantesses shouted in what sounded like fear. Lyria stepped forward, her expression as hard as stone. She whispered one word that chilled me to the bone. Then she looked at me again, and this time, there was no gentleness in her eyes. Whatever she had saved me from, it wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey. The horn's echo was a promise of danger. Lyria and her giantesses froze, their crystal armor shimmering to life. What's happening? I yelled, but I already knew. She pointed a glowing finger towards the forest. Orange lights, dozens of them, flickered between the trees, followed by hulking shadows, enemies. The ground beneath my feet started to vibrate, a deep, unsettling hum that replaced the temple's gentle energy. The distant, unmistakable sound of marching metal grew closer. Another giantess shouted at Lyria, who shot back a firm reply, gesturing towards me. With a frustrated look, the giantess rejoined the others. They formed a circle, raising their hands to create a shimmering wall of light around the temple entrance. What are you protecting me from? I whispered, a cold dread creeping up my spine. I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Then, the forest exploded. Giants emerged, but they were different. Their skin was a sickly gray, their eyes burned with a malevolent red light. They wore heavy spiked armor and carried spears that seemed impossibly large. They were hunters, and they were here for a reason. Lyria strode forward, her own light intensifying, and shouted a single, challenging word. The leader of the Dark Ones just laughed and raised his weapon. The battle began in a blinding flash. The sky filled with fire and streaks of energy. The entire temple shook with every impact. I hit the floor as a shockwave shattered the crystal torches around me. Lyria was a force of nature, a bolt of lightning in humanoid form. Each strike she landed sent shockwaves across the battlefield. Her sisters moved with the same impossible speed and power, but they were outnumbered. For every enemy they felled, 2 more charged from the woods. I crawled desperately, searching for any cover. My heart hammered against my ribs, a tiny, helpless human trapped in a war of gods. That's when I saw it. One of the dark giants had slipped past their defenses, creeping up behind Lyria. It raised a black spear, aiming for her back. Acting on pure instinct, I grabbed my blaster and fired. The shot seared into the creature's eye. It roared in pain and stumbled, giving Lyria just enough time to turn and obliterate it with a glowing fist. She looked at me, her violet eyes wide with shock and a flicker of gratitude. She saw me, but the fight was far from over. The enemy leader raised his weapon to the sky. Dark clouds swirled into a violent purple storm. Lightning began striking the ground all around us. Lyria shouted to her sisters, and they began a deep, thundering chant. I was frozen, watching as ancient powers clashed. The storm exploded. A bolt of black lightning hit the temple roof, tearing it apart. The ground split open right beneath me. I screamed as I fell, tumbling down a dark chasm of broken rock and dirt. Everything went black. When I came to, the air was still and thick with dust. My head throbbed. I was deep underground. Faint rumbles from above told me the fight was still raging. My suit's lights flickered on, revealing a long tunnel covered in glowing symbols that pulsed like a soft heartbeat. There was no going back up. I had to follow them. The tunnel opened into a large chamber. In the center, half buried, was a round, faintly glowing device. It looked human. I stepped closer, brushing away the dust. Words were carved into the metal, in English. Project Valora, humanity's last legend. My breath caught in my throat. I wiped away more dust. Created 289 years ago, Genetic Giants Division. My mind reeled. Humanity made them? A soft voice behind me made me jump. It was Lyria, covered in dust and wounds, but alive. She walked slowly towards me, her eyes tired but her face unreadable. I pointed at the inscription. You see this? You were made by humans. You're one of us. She looked from the text to me and gave a slight sad nod. Kneeling down to my level, she spoke one word, a word I understood with perfect clarity. Forgotten. She reached out and touched the ancient machine. It hummed to life and a hologram flickered into existence above it. An image of Earth. I just stared. Lyria turned to me, her voice trembling. Home? My throat was dry. Yes, I whispered. Home. The ground trembled again, louder this time. The hunters were coming. Lyria stood tall, her eyes burning with a new fire. She looked from the hologram of Earth to me and spoke a short, powerful vow. I didn't understand the words, but her message was clear. She wasn't just fighting for her people anymore. She was fighting for me. For home. For the forgotten link between HumanVsAliens. The temple above them shook again. Rocks fell from the ceiling and the sound of thunder rolled through the tunnels. The battle was getting closer. Ethan turned to Lyria, panic gripping his voice. We have to get out of here. But she didn't move. Her violet eyes stayed locked on the hologram of Earth spinning slowly in the air. For her, it wasn't just a picture. It was a memory, a dream. Home, she whispered again, her voice soft like wind through glass. Ethan stepped closer. You remember it, don't you? Humanity made your kind. You were part of something called Project Valora. Lyria looked down at him, sadness and confusion mixing in her expression. She placed her hand over her heart and said something quietly in her own language. He couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was crystal clear. They left us. The sentiment didn't need a translator. A deep crash echoed from the tunnel entrance. Ethan grabbed his blaster and looked back. We need to move now. Lyria nodded, finally pulling away from the hologram. She touched one of the walls and ancient symbols began to shift, glowing brighter. The stone cracked open, revealing a hidden passage leading deeper underground. Smart, Ethan muttered, following her into the unknown. The tunnel sloped downward, cold air rushing past them. The light from Lyria's body illuminated the walls, each one covered in carvings. Humans standing beside the giantesses, building cities, fighting monsters together. The deeper they went, the older everything looked. Then they reached a huge metal door, ancient, sealed shut. Lyria placed her palm against it, but nothing happened. The symbols on the surface stayed dark. She frowned, tried again, harder this time. Still nothing. Ethan stepped forward, scanning the surface. Maybe it needs both of us, he said, placing his hand next to hers. A low hum started immediately. The symbols flared to life. Lyria's eyes widened in surprise. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw a faint smile. Together they pushed. The door gave way. Inside was a massive chamber, dark, silent, filled with giant machines and broken pods. Dust covered everything, but one pod near the center still glowed faintly. Ethan climbed over fallen cables to reach it. The screen on its side flickered with a single message. Status, final prototype, Guardian class, Lyria. He froze. Slowly, he turned toward her. She was staring at the pod too, realization dawning in her glowing eyes. You were made here, Ethan whispered. You were the last one. You make us. He nodded slowly. A long time ago. But something must have happened. Maybe the humans left this planet. Maybe you were forgotten. Lyria's expression hardened. She looked back at the pod, then at him again, her voice trembling with an emotion he couldn't quite place. Forgotten. Hurt. Before Ethan could respond, A loud roar thundered through the tunnel. The hunters had found them. The sound of metal scraping against rock filled the chamber. Lyria spun around, pulling Ethan close to her chest protectively. A spear of black energy struck the ground near them, exploding into shards. Ethan coughed from the smoke. "They're here!" Lyria set him down gently and stepped forward, her whole body glowing brighter than before. Energy flowed across her arms, shaping into a weapon, a long staff made of pure light. When the first dark giant entered, she met him with a strike so fast it cut through the air like lightning. The fight was brutal. Every hit from Lyria sent shockwaves through the floor. The hunters were strong, but she was stronger. This was her home, her creation ground, her past, and she would not let it fall again. Ethan ducked behind a console, firing at the hunters whenever he could. One of his shots hit a weak point in their armor, slowing one down. He wasn't strong like Lyria, but he refused to be useless. Then the leader of the hunters stepped forward. His armor pulsed with red energy, and his eyes glowed like fire. He raised a massive blade and charged straight for Lyria. The impact shook the entire room. Sparks flew as light and darkness clashed in bursts of pure energy. The noise was deafening. Ethan ran toward the pod, desperate for any weapon or control system. He found a small terminal, its screen still active. He tapped it, and strange symbols appeared, mixed with Old English letters. Activation sequence. Guardian protocols. Without thinking, he pressed activate. A deep hum filled the chamber. The floor vibrated. The pod beside him began to glow, then crack open. Inside was another figure, larger, armored in silver and gold. A female shaped like Lyria's, but mechanical. Lyria turned her head, eyes wide. "Sister." The machine's eyes opened, bright blue. It stepped out of the pod and faced the hunters. Without hesitation, it raised its hand and unleashed a beam of energy so powerful, it disintegrated two of them instantly. Ethan shielded his face from the blast. "Whoa!" Together, Lyria and the mechanical guardian fought side by side, light and fire twisting through the air. The leader of the hunters roared in rage but began to fall back. Within minutes, the battle was over. Smoke and silence filled the chamber. Lyria stood still, breathing hard. Her sister turned to her, their eyes meeting for a long, wordless moment. Then the guardian looked at Ethan, tilted her head slightly, and spoke one word in a soft metallic voice. "Human." Then she collapsed, the light in her eyes fading. Lyria caught her before she fell. For the first time, Ethan saw real, deep pain in her expression. He stepped forward carefully. "We have to leave," he said quietly. "More of them will come." She didn't look at him at first, only at the lifeless guardian in her arms. Then she whispered, "No more forgotten." Silence. That's all that was left in the chamber. The light from the fallen guardian, Lyria's protector, dissolved into a gentle cascade of blue dust. Lyria stood there, her massive frame trembling, not from fear, but from an emotion I couldn't yet name. Through her metallic skin, I saw a light inside her, a core that burned brighter and brighter with every beat of her heart. The ancient chamber seemed to awaken with her. Carvings on the walls began to glow, one by one, tracing paths of light until the entire room shimmered. The very air grew thick as machines, dormant for centuries, hummed back to life. I stepped back, shielding my eyes from the sudden brilliance. "Lyria, what's happening?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were closed as she gently placed a hand on the chest of her fallen comrade. The glow from her body flowed into the lifeless metal shell, not to revive it, but to trigger something else. The light spread across the floor like a flood, climbing the walls in luminous rivers. And then the hologram of Earth reappeared, larger, clearer than before, but this time it showed a map, connecting Earth to hundreds of glowing dots scattered across the galaxy. As I watched, dots began to blink out, one by one. Lost colonies, dead worlds, forgotten promises, until only one remained, a single, defiant point of light. Valora. A cold realization washed over me. You were humanity's last colony, the last of us. Lyria finally turned to me, her eyes a mix of fierce strength and deep sorrow. You remember now? I shook my head, ashamed. No. My generation didn't know. The records were erased after the war. We lost everything. Her gaze fell. Humans. Leave. We protect. Wait. Long time. The words hit me like a physical blow. You waited? For us? She nodded, her voice cracking slightly. We guard world. You never come back. And then I understood. Her people weren't just aliens. They were our legacy, built by humans, then abandoned by them, left to be hunted by the monstrous creatures that must have been born from the same corrupted experiments. Suddenly the temple lights flickered violently and the ground shook. Lyria looked up, her expression hardening. They come again. I scrambled to the control terminal, my fingers flying across the console. They've found the tunnels. We'll be buried alive if we don't move now. Lyria nodded, scooping me up with impossible gentleness. She carried me through a hidden passage behind the ancient pod, running as explosions rocked the caverns above us, shaking dust from the ceiling in waves. Lyria, I yelled over the din. You can't fight them all. She looked down at me, her face strangely calm. Not fight, awaken. Before I could ask what she meant, the tunnel opened into a cavern so vast it defied belief. My heart stopped. There, buried beneath the mountain, was a ship. A starship larger than any city I had ever seen, its hull shimmering with the same material as Lyria's armor. And on its side, in English and ancient runes, were the words, VSS Promise, Guardian Command Ship. I whispered, It's human. Lyria set me down and walked towards it, her hand glowing. Valora, live again. She pressed her palm against the ship's hull. Energy pulsed through the ground, and with a low hum, lights flickered across the massive vessel. The ship was coming alive. You can start it? I asked, my voice filled with awe. She nodded once. Made by humans. Linked to me. Just then, another explosion tore through the cavern ceiling. Cracks spiderwebbed above us and rocks began to fall. The hunters were here. Lyria, hurry, I shouted. Ramps extended from the ship's side. Lyria lifted me and stepped aboard. The moment her feet touched the deck, a calm, synthesized voice filled the air. Guardian recognized Lyria, Commander Unit. Power core 43% restored. Weapon systems, stand by. A grin spread across my face. Looks like we've got a fighting chance. But Lyria wasn't smiling. Her gaze was fixed on the tunnel entrance where red lights flickered, growing closer. No chance, she said softly. Only choice. And then they poured in. Dozens of them, their armor smoking, their rage a palpable force. Their leader raised his weapon, letting out a roar that shook the very air. Lyria turned to me, her eyes filled with a sad finality. You go. I shook my head frantically. What? No, I'm not leaving you. A gentle, tragic smile touched her lips. You bring truth to your people. Tell them, Valora still lives. The hunters charged. Lyria turned to face them, her body erupting in light, blazing like a newborn sun. The explosion filled the cavern, a silent, beautiful, and terrifying wave of energy that tore through the hunters, erasing them from existence. I was thrown backward, my world turning white. When I came to, I was in a small escape pod. Outside the viewport, the stars stretched into infinity. Below, the planet Valora was wrapped in a serene blue fire. Lyria, I whispered. The pod's screen flickered on, displaying a message in her voice. Human Ethan, you remember us. You carry truth. Do not forget again. The pod jumped to hyperspace, and as Valora faded into a distant memory, I knew my mission. For the first time in centuries, a human had seen Valora. And now, I would make sure humanity remembered. Ethan woke up to a strange quiet. The thunder that had shaken the valley for days was gone. The air felt heavy and still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He sat up slowly, his body aching from the last night's storm. Around him, the campfires had burned out. Only thin trails of smoke rose toward the gray morning sky. The giantess warriors who had guarded him were gone. Their massive footprints surrounded the area leading up the hill. Ethan's heart raced. Something had happened. Something big. He grabbed his torn jacket, checked his small communicator, and began following the tracks. For hours he climbed through the fog until he reached the edge of a massive crater. The ground trembled under his feet. In the center stood the queen of the giantesses, taller than any he had seen before. Her silver hair flowed like rivers of light, and her eyes glowed with a strange mix of sadness and power. Ethan hid behind a fallen stone pillar, watching. The other giantesses stood in a half-circle before her, heads bowed, their weapons stuck into the ground like offerings. The queen raised her hand. "He comes from the stars," she said, her voice deep but soft, "and his arrival breaks the curse." The warriors looked up. Ethan froze. Were they talking about him? Suddenly the queen's gaze turned directly toward his hiding spot. "Come forward, little traveler," she said. "You cannot hide from the wind that speaks your name." Ethan hesitated, then stepped into the open. The ground trembled under her steps as she approached. He felt like an insect beneath her shadow, but her expression wasn't angry. It was tired. "You fell from the sky," she said, kneeling. "You carry light in your blood. That is why the storm changed. That is why the hunger weakens." Ethan swallowed hard. Hunger. What hunger? The queen smiled faintly. "The hunger that drives my daughters. The hunger for warmth, for life. This world drains them. It drains all who live here. You, human, bring energy they cannot resist." Ethan's stomach tightened. So that's why he remembered their eyes, their strange desire, the way they surrounded him. "You mean, they weren't trying to kill me?" "No," she said gently. "They were trying to live." A deep rumble shook the ground. The queen looked toward the horizon where the clouds turned red. "The storm returns, the planet feeds again. If you stay, it will consume you too." Ethan glanced at the sky. "I have to get back to my ship. I can fix it. I can leave." The queen tilted her head. "Leave? You think the stars will welcome you? You have been marked, human. The planet's essence is inside you now. It will follow wherever you go." Ethan's pulse quickened. Then, "What do I do?" The queen leaned closer, her eyes glowing brighter. "You must go to the heart of the world. There lies the source of the hunger, the root of all storms. Destroy it, and you may free yourself. But beware. The heart does not wish to die." He nodded slowly. "Where is it?" The queen pointed to the farthest peaks. "Beyond the Valley of Bones. The path is watched by shadows. My daughters cannot go there. Only you can." "Why me?" Ethan's mind spun. "Because you carry both their curse and your own courage," she said softly. "You are small, but your spirit burns hotter than the sun." She reached out her massive hand and placed something in front of him, a shard of glowing crystal. "This will guide you. It holds part of my power. When the time comes, break it." Ethan picked it up carefully. The crystal pulsed with light that matched his heartbeat. He looked up at the queen. "Will I see you again?" The queen smiled sadly. "If you succeed, you will see everything again. If you fail, you will see nothing." With that, she rose, turning to her people. The giantesses bowed one by one, their massive forms fading into the mist. Ethan stood alone, clutching the crystal. The storm began to rise again, and the wind carried the queen's final whisper. "Run, human. The heart is waking." He turned toward the mountains, determination burning in his chest. His escape was no longer about survival. It was about ending the hunger of an entire world. The wind screamed through the mountains as Ethan climbed higher, every step heavier than the last. His hands were torn, his clothes burned from lightning strikes, but he didn't stop. The crystal the Queen had given him glowed brighter with each step, leading him toward the center of the storm, the heart of the world. The mountains opened into a deep valley filled with bones the size of towers. Old giantess skeletons lay half-buried in the ground, silent witnesses to endless storms. The path led him to a massive pit glowing with red light. He could hear it, a heartbeat, deep and slow, echoing through the earth. Thump, thump, thump. The planet was alive, and it was hungry. At the bottom of the pit, something pulsed. A huge sphere of molten flesh and light, chained to the rocks by glowing tendrils. It wasn't just the heart of the planet, it was the source of the hunger. Ethan's communicator flickered. A faint signal came through, the Queen's voice. The heart knows you, human. It will call to you. Do not listen. You must destroy it before it consumes your mind. He started down the jagged path, the air getting hotter with each step. Voices whispered around him, soft, sweet, tempting. Stay with us. No more running, little star. Ethan shook his head and pressed on. The whispers turned into screams. The heart opened like an eye, staring directly at him. You bring the Queen's light, a deep voice boomed. Give it to me and I will let you live. Ethan gritted his teeth. You've taken enough lives. He raised the glowing crystal. The light from it grew blinding. For them, for freedom, he shouted, and slammed the crystal into the heart. A shockwave exploded outward. The world went white. When he woke, the storm was gone. The sky above was blue for the first time. The hunger had ended. Faint lights rose from the earth, spirits of the giantesses, smiling as they drifted into the sky. One stepped closer. It was the Queen, her form made of golden mist. You did it, she said softly. The world is free, and so are my daughters. Ethan smiled weakly. Guess I'm not so small after all. She laughed gently. You were never small, only human, and that was enough. The light around her began to fade. Your ship waits beyond the mountains. Go. The stars will know your name. He watched as she vanished. He stood and looked toward the horizon. Smoke rose where his ship had crashed. He started walking. Hours later, he reached the wreck. He climbed inside and activated the wind screamed through the mountains as Ethan climbed higher, every step heavier than the last. His hands were torn, his clothes scorched from lightning strikes, but he refused to stop. The crystal the Queen had given him pulsed with a warm light, growing brighter with each step, pulling him toward the heart of the storm, the heart of the world. The mountains suddenly fell away, opening into a deep, vast valley. It was a graveyard. Bones the size of towers lay half-buried in the ground, the skeletons of ancient giantesses, silent witnesses to countless storms. The very air shimmered with a strange, unsettling energy that made his skin crawl. Ethan tightened his grip on the crystal. Almost there, he whispered, his voice lost in the wind. The path led him to a massive pit, glowing with a terrifying red light. And then he heard it, a heartbeat, deep and slow, echoing through the very earth beneath his feet. Thump, thump, thump. The planet was alive, and it was hungry. He peered cautiously over the edge. Down at the bottom, something pulsed, a colossal sphere of molten flesh and raw light, chained to the rocks by glowing tendrils. Arcs of energy cracked around it like lightning. This wasn't just the heart of the planet. It was the source of the insatiable hunger that had driven the giantesses to madness for centuries. His communicator flickered. A faint, crackling signal came through. It was the Queen's voice. The heart knows you, human. It will call to you. Do not listen. You must destroy it before it consumes your mind. Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. Copy that. He started down the jagged path into the pit, the air growing hotter, thicker with each step. The red glow became blinding. Whispers slithered around him, soft, sweet, and tempting. They sounded like the giantesses he'd met on his journey. Stay with us. We can keep you safe. No more running, little star. Ethan shook his head, trying to clear the voices, and pressed on. The whispers twisted into screams of rage and pain. The ground trembled violently. The heart opened like a monstrous eye, its gaze locking directly onto him. You bring the Queen's light. A deep, resonant voice boomed from the pit, shaking his bones. Give it to me and I will let you live. Ethan gritted his teeth, his resolve hardening into steel. You've taken enough lives. He raised the glowing crystal high above his head. Its pure light exploded outwards, a brilliant white that cut through the suffocating red haze. The heart let out a deafening scream, shaking the entire mountain range. Lightning struck all around him, splintering rock. Ethan broke into a desperate run, holding the crystal like a torch. For them! For freedom! He shouted, and with every ounce of his strength he slammed the crystal into the monstrous, pulsing heart. A shockwave of pure energy erupted outward. The ground cracked open, throwing him violently backward as the world dissolved into blinding white. When he finally woke, the storm was gone. The sky above was a clear, brilliant blue for the first time. The valley was utterly silent. The colossal bones were still, but now they seemed peaceful. The hunger had ended. Ethan sat up slowly, his body feeling strangely weightless. All around him, faint lights began to rise from the earth, the spirits of the Giantesses, their faces serene, smiling as they drifted into the sky. One of them stepped closer. It was the Queen, her form now made of golden, shimmering mist. She looked down at him, her spectral eyes filled with pride. You did it, she said softly. The world is free. And so are my daughters. Ethan managed a weak smile. Guess I'm not so small after all. The Queen laughed, a sound like gentle wind chimes. You were never small, only human, and that was enough. The light around her began to fade. Your ship waits beyond the mountains. Go. The stars will know your name. Ethan watched as she vanished with the wind. He got to his feet and looked toward the horizon. Smoke still rose from his crashed ship, but now it glowed faintly under the new sunlight. He took a deep, clean breath and started walking. Each step felt lighter, each breath easier. The planet was alive, but it was no longer hungry. Hours later, he reached the wreck. The systems were mostly broken, but the engine core hummed with a faint, hopeful energy. He climbed inside and activated the controls. System rebooting. Energy level stable, the ship's AI announced. Ethan smiled. Let's go home. As the ship lifted off the ground, he looked down one last time. The forests were already looking greener. Rivers sparkled in the sun. He could see giantess shapes moving in the distance, alive, free, and no longer bound by the ravenous hunger. The Queen's voice echoed faintly in his mind. Remember us, traveler. You ended the storm. The ship broke through the clouds and the infinite stars opened up above him. Ethan leaned back in his seat, watching the endless void ahead. He was exhausted, but he was alive. He had escaped the planet of the Giantesses, but he knew he would never forget it, and far below in the heart of that reborn world, a new crystal began to glow, bright, human, and eternal. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey with Ethan. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more adventures. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the finale in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious.